Text came through 3000 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do now that my back won't let me sleep past 3. 62 years old and my body runs on a schedule nobody asked for. I was staring at the ceiling fan, counting the slow rotations, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a voice message from Poppy. My granddaughter is 9 years old. She doesn't text. She never texts. When she wants to reach me, she records these little voice messages, sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes 3 minutes, always starting with, "Hi Grandpa Ray, it's me." Like I wouldn't know. Like I could ever not know her voice. I press play. "Hi Grandpa Ray, it's me." A pause. Then the sound that every grandparent dreads. That specific kind of crying that a child does when they've been trying to hold it in for too long and finally can't anymore. I woke up and the house is really quiet. I looked in all the rooms and nobody's here. I looked in the garage and the car is gone. I don't understand why they didn't wake me up. Did I do something wrong? Can you call me back? I'm sorry if it's late. I was out of bed before the message finished. My wife Judith was sitting up before I made it to the closet. 38 years of marriage and the woman can sense when something shifts. Ray, what happened? They left Poppy. She didn't ask me to repeat it. She just got up and started getting dressed. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the context, and the context is the kind of thing that takes a while to say out loud without your chest tightening up. My son, Patrick, is 41 years old. He's a good man in many ways, works hard, pays his bills, shows up when it matters to him. The problem is the list of things that matter to him has gotten shorter over the years, not longer. His wife, Gwendolyn, is the kind of woman who manages a household like a project plan. Everything categorized, everything optimized. I try to like her. I still try. 3 years ago, Patrick and Gwendolyn adopted Poppy. She was 6 at the time, had already been through 2 foster placements, and the first time I met her, she shook my hand like a 40-year-old and said, "It's very nice to meet you, sir." I almost lost it right there in the driveway. Something about a 6-year-old who's learned to be that formal with adults. It tells you everything you need to know about what she'd already been through. I loved her from that handshake. They also have a biological son, Marcus. Wait, no. I need to stop. Their son. His name is Tanner. He's 12, 3 years older than Poppy, and he has his mother's chin and his father's stubbornness, and a way of looking at his sister that I noticed early on, but told myself I was imagining. I wasn't imagining. The difference in how Patrick and Gwendolyn treated the 2 kids wasn't dramatic at first. It was the kind of thing you could explain away. Tanner got the better seat in the car. Well, he called it first. Poppy's birthday party had fewer kids. Well, she's newer to the school. Tanner got the upgraded baseball glove while Poppy's soccer cleats were from the outlet. Well, baseball gear is just more expensive. I told myself these stories because I wanted them to be true. Then came the Disney trip last spring. A full week, 4-day park tickets, resort hotel, the whole package. Patrick mentioned it at Sunday dinner like it was nothing. We're taking Tanner to Disney for spring break. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. Poppy was sitting right there, eating her green beans, and she looked up once and then looked back down. I said, "Just Tanner," Gwendolyn said. "Poppy's not really into theme parks." Poppy is 9 years old. Every 9-year-old is into theme parks. That's essentially the definition of being 9. I didn't push it that night. I talked to Patrick alone the following week, quietly, the way you're supposed to handle family things. He told me Poppy had mentioned once that loud places made her nervous, and they were respecting that. I said, "Did you ask her directly?" He said she'd be fine staying with his mother-in-law. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. But I did, and they went to Disney, and when they came back, Tanner had a stuffed animal and a new t-shirt, and Poppy had a souvenir, snow globe that her brother brought her, which I'm sure he was told to do. She put it on her windowsill, and didn't mention Disney for a month. So when this summer trip came up, I was watching more carefully. Patrick called me in May to tell me about it. A 7-day trip to the Outer Banks. Beach house rental. Something like $6,000 or $7,000 for the week. Private access, the works. He was excited. He went on for 10 minutes about the kayaking and the lighthouse tours and the seafood restaurants. I said, "Poppy's going to love the beach." Silence. Patrick. She gets carsick on long drives. It's a 9-hour drive, Dad. Have you asked her? We figured we'd keep it low-key this time. Marlene. Wait, no. Gwendolyn's sister will take her for the week. I said, very carefully, does Poppy know this plan? He said they were going to talk to her about it before they left. They did not talk to her before they left. They left at 4 in the morning. I know this because Poppy's voice message came in at 3:47, and by the time I called her back, they were already gone. She picked up on the first ring. I could hear the echo of an empty house. Grandpa Ray. Hi, sweetheart. I'm here. The car's gone. I know. I'm coming to get you right now, okay? Don't be scared. You didn't do anything wrong. This is not about you. I want you to understand why I said that last part first, before anything else, because I knew from the way she'd asked in the voicemail, that a child who's already lost 2 homes before age 6 goes to self-blame the way water goes downhill. It's the path of least resistance when nothing else makes sense. You're coming now? Judith and I are already in the car. We'll be there in 25 minutes. We weren't in the car yet, but we were 90 seconds away from being in the car, and I needed her to have a number to hold on to. Judith drove because my hands weren't steady enough to trust. I sat in the passenger seat doing calculations in my head. 9-hour drive to the Outer Banks. They'd left around 3:45. By the time we got Poppy, got her settled, figured out a plan, they'd have a 4 or 5 hour head start. I pulled up the rental confirmation Patrick had forwarded me back in May. He'd CC'd me on everything, always does, very organized family, and found the property address. Then I looked up driving times. 9 hours and 12 minutes from my zip code. I called the beach house rental company when they opened at 8 a.m. The listing said the property had a check-in time of 4 p.m. I wanted to know if early check-in was available. It was, for a small fee. I want to be clear about something. I'm a retired electrician. Judith worked in hospital administration for 30 years. We're not wealthy people. We live carefully, we save carefully, and we make choices. What I'm saying is that when I put 4 nights at the same beach town on my credit card that morning, a modest place, nothing fancy, a little rental cottage, 2 miles from the house Patrick had booked, it wasn't nothing. It was a decision. I made it without hesitating. Poppy was sitting on the front porch when we pulled up, her backpack already on, but she packed herself without being asked. She's that kind of kid. She prepares. She's learned that the world requires her to be ready to move quickly. That detail alone has stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that morning. She climbed into the back seat. She said, "Hi, Grandma Judith," and buckled her seatbelt. She didn't cry again. She just looked out the window while we drove, and after a few minutes she said, "Are we going to your house?" Judith turned around in the passenger seat. I was driving now, and said, "We're going to the beach." Poppy went still. "We thought maybe you'd like to see the ocean," I said. "You ever been to the Outer Banks?" She shook her head. "It's beautiful out there. Miles of beach, wild horses, lighthouses. You can eat hush puppies and watch the pelicans." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that where—" She stopped. "Yes," I said. "That's where they went, and we're going too, because you deserve a vacation just as much as anybody, and I'm not going to let this week be something that happened to you. You understand me?" She didn't say anything, but in the rearview mirror I saw her nod, and then she turned back to the window, and I watched her expression shift from something closed off to something I can only describe as cautiously open, like a window being cracked for the first time in a long time. We drove 9 hours with stops. We listened to an audiobook about a girl who trains wild horses. Judith had downloaded it the night before on a hunch, and the hunch was right. We ate at a barbecue place in Eastern Carolina where Poppy had pulled pork for the first time and declared it actually incredible. We crossed the bridge to the Outer Banks at a little past 4 in the afternoon, and Poppy pressed her face to the window and watched the water on both sides, and I heard her breathe in sharp, the way you do when something is bigger than you expected. "It's everywhere," she said. "It is," Judith said. We checked into our cottage. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a little screened porch, 3 blocks from the public beach. Judith had packed a bag for Poppy with a spare swimsuit and sunscreen and a toothbrush because of course she had. We took Poppy to the beach that first evening, the golden hour, and she stood at the water's edge and let the waves come up over her feet. And she laughed, just purely laughed, when a bigger one caught her off guard and soaked her shorts. That was the moment I thought, however this goes with Patrick, at least there's this, at least she has this. The next morning, I texted Patrick. I want to tell you exactly what I wrote, because I thought about it for a long time before I sent it. I didn't want to be cruel. I didn't want to be dramatic. I also wasn't going to pretend. I wrote, Patrick, Poppy woke up alone at 3:47 in the morning and didn't know where her family had gone. Judith and I picked her up and drove her down here. We're in the Outer Banks. I'd like to talk when you're ready. He called me 40 seconds later. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. I needed him to have some time with that message before we spoke, because I knew if I picked up right then, while he was in his first burst of defensiveness, neither of us would say anything useful. He called again an hour later. I picked up. Dad, I can explain. I don't need an explanation right now, I said. I need you to listen. I said it quietly. I wasn't yelling. My father used to yell when he was angry, and I made a decision somewhere in my 30s that I wouldn't do that. Yelling is easy. It feels like doing something when you're not actually doing anything. What I had to say to my son required calm because it was serious. I told him that his daughter, I used that word deliberately, his daughter had called me at 3:47 in the morning from an empty house, alone, scared and confused. I told him that she'd asked me, in that voicemail, whether she'd done something wrong. I told him she'd had her backpack packed by the time we arrived, because somewhere in her, this little girl has been trained to expect that she might need to leave quickly. I asked him if he understood what that meant about her history, about what she'd already been through before she came to them. He was quiet for a long time. I told him that what he and Gwendolyn had done wasn't a minor oversight. I wasn't angry about the logistics. I was concerned about the pattern. Disney. Then this. And I told him that if there was a next time, there might not be a quiet conversation. There might be a harder conversation with more people in it. I don't issue ultimatums. That's not who I am. But I also won't pretend things are fine when they aren't. He said, we didn't think she'd wake up before we got settled and called. Patrick. I stopped him. She's 9. You left at 4 in the morning. You didn't leave a note. You didn't call ahead. What did you think was going to happen when she woke up in an empty house? Another long silence. I don't know, Dad. That answer was actually the most honest thing he'd said in a while. I didn't know either, I said, but I think that was the problem. What I did not do was have this conversation in front of Poppy. While I stepped outside to take Patrick's call, Judith had taken Poppy to the little market down the road to pick out breakfast things. Eggs, orange juice, the glazed donuts. Poppy had spotted in the window and pointed at with very serious 9-year-old energy. By the time I came back inside, they were setting up the kitchen and Judith was teaching Poppy how to make scrambled eggs the way Judith makes them, with a little cream cheese folded in at the end. Poppy was concentrating so hard she had her tongue pressed to her lip. I don't know what Poppy understood about why she was with us and not with her family. Kids know more than we think they do, and they process it on their own timeline. What I know is that I didn't add to her confusion by letting her hear things she didn't need to hear. Whatever Patrick and Gwendolyn owed her in terms of explanation, that was their conversation to have with her, in the right moment, in the right way, not mine to shortcut. We had 4 days. We did the lighthouse, the Cape Hatteras lighthouse, 257 steps, and Poppy counted every single one out loud, and by step 180 she was winded and counting between breaths, and we were all laughing. We drove to the part of the park where the wild horses roam, the Caritak herds up in Corolla, and we spotted a small band of them near the dune grass, just standing in the morning light, and Poppy grabbed my sleeve without realizing she'd done it. She just grabbed it and held on. We ate seafood 3 nights running because she decided she loved shrimp, then loved scallops, then announced that oysters were weird but okay. We found a shop that sold kites and spent an afternoon on the beach with a big Delta kite that Poppy eventually learned to fly herself, the string vibrating in her hands from the pull of the wind. On the 3rd night, she said, while we were on the porch watching it get dark over the water, "Grandpa Ray, do you think I'll come back here someday?" I said, "I think you might come back a lot of times. With you. Hopefully with us. Maybe with your family too, someday." She thought about that. "I'd like that," she said finally. "I'd like both." "What happened with Patrick?" "I'm going to tell you, but I want to be honest that it wasn't a clean ending. Real things rarely are. He and Gwendolyn met with Judith and me a few weeks after we all got home. We sat around their kitchen table. It was uncomfortable in the way that necessary conversations usually are. Gwendolyn cried, which I wasn't expecting. She said some things about her own childhood, about how her family had done things, and I listened because I think you have to listen, even when you're the one who's right, maybe especially then. Patrick was quieter than I'd ever seen him, what they committed to, and I'm holding on to this not because I trust words, but because I'll be watching, was treating Poppy as equally their child as Tanner. Same opportunities, same consideration, same conversations beforehand instead of logistics worked out around her. They're in family counseling now, which was not something I suggested, but something Patrick said on his own, and I'll admit I was surprised, and I was glad. Poppy started 4th grade this fall. She's on a soccer team, the kind where they actually keep score, because she asked for a competitive league and they put her in one. She's fast. The first time I watched her play, she scored twice and sprinted back to the center line with this expression on her face, like she was trying to hold herself together and not quite succeeding. Pure joy. Just barely contained. She still sends voice messages. They still start with, "Hi Grandpa Ray, it's me." I save every one of them. I have 47 saved, which I know because I counted. The one from the Outer Banks trip. Not the 3047 one, but the last one she sent before we drove home. She'd snuck outside early in the morning while Judith and I were still asleep, sat on the little porch and recorded herself talking about the sound the ocean made, how it never stopped, how it was still going even when you couldn't see it. She said she thought that was probably a good thing about the world. 9 years old. I spent 35 years as an electrician. I know how to trace a problem back to its source, how to find the break in the line, how to restore the connection. I thought that was the most useful thing I'd ever learned to do. I was wrong. The most useful thing I've ever done is answer a phone call at 3:47 in the morning and say, "I'm already on my way." I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any complicated way, just the plain, honest version of it that you learn from living long enough to see things come back around. Patrick and Gwendolyn made a series of small choices. That's how I've come to understand it. Not one dramatic act of cruelty, just a pattern of small decisions, each one reasonable sounding on its own, that added up to something a 9-year-old girl felt in her chest at 3:47 in the morning in an empty house. That's how it usually works. The damage people do to each other rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates quietly in the gaps between what we say we believe and what we actually do when nobody's making us accountable. And the response to that, what Judith and I did, was also a series of small choices. Answer the phone, get dressed, get in the car, book the cottage, show up. None of those things required heroism. They just required deciding each time to keep going. I think about Poppy packing her own backpack before we arrived. She'd been awake, alone, frightened, and she packed a bag because she's learned, through no fault of her own, that you have to be ready. That's a kind of resilience that breaks my heart a little because it came from somewhere hard. But it's also real. It's hers, and part of what I wanted to give her that week. The lighthouse steps, the wild horses, the kite pulling hard against the wind, with the chance to use that resilience for something good instead of just for surviving. There's something I believe about raising children, or in my case about being part of a child's life. The most important thing you can teach a kid isn't a skill or a rule. It's the experience of being worth showing up for. That's it. When a child knows in their body that someone will come, that the phone call will be answered, that the car will pull into the driveway, something settles in them that no amount of explanation can put there. You can't talk a child into feeling secure. You have to demonstrate it repeatedly with your actual presence. Patrick is learning that. Later than he should have, but he's learning. I've watched him with Poppy these past few months. More careful, more deliberate, asking her things instead of deciding around her. It's not perfect. It's not going to be a clean transformation, but I think the conversation we had, the quiet one on the phone while Judith and Poppy made scrambled eggs in the cottage kitchen, landed somewhere in him that he needed it to land. What I know is this: the choices we make toward children, all children, not just the ones who share our blood, shape what kind of people they become and what kind of world they expect to live in. Poppy is going to grow up. She's going to remember this trip, and she's going to remember who came for her. That memory will be part of how she moves through the world. What she believes is possible, what she thinks she deserves. I want her to believe she deserves a lot, because she does. 47 voice messages saved. I'm not deleting a single one.